Hello and welcome to the Screen Composer Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. After studying business administration and recording engineering, Gary Koftinoff spent 10 years in post-production at the Toronto facilities of Filmhouse, which would later become Deluxe. There, he got a crash course in the art and craft of filmmaking, storytelling, and client relations, and got to peek behind the curtain while working with some of the biggest names in the business. It was also the perfect place to meet editors, producers, and other people who would later become instrumental in helping him get his start as a film and television composer. We chat about the powerful moment that turned him onto his path, unusual ways to find themes and get gigs, and how he approaches his work on hit shows like Saving Hope, Life with Derek, and Hudson Rex, which he co-scores with Phil Bennett. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. Now, please enjoy my wide-ranging conversation with Gary Koftinoff. Gary, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Adrian. It's great to be here.
So, where are you coming from for today?
Well, I'm in my studio in lovely South Surrey, British Columbia.
Nice. What's the weather like out these days?
A little rainy.
Oh, that sounds like
rainy.
Vancouver.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, South Surrey is actually, the furthest south. That's why we actually moved here, because it has the least amount of rainfall today.
I lived in Vancouver for a couple of years. Do you find that a really inspiring place to live? Like, do the surroundings and that ability to go skiing in the morning and swimming basically in the afternoon, does that help your creativity?
I think it helps your overall well-being, and that's certainly part of your creativity, I would say.
Do you have kind of a routine or a kind of self-care routine that's worked into the sort of natural surroundings?
I was doing like a morning walk for half an hour every day. It's great around here. There's forest, you can go through and, really kind of old growth stuff if you just go a little ways up our street here. It's beautiful forest. I stopped that a little bit. I do have my own kind of fitness regime that I do. We have a gym in our garage, and I work out regularly. I really believe in that being a part of your overall well-being. I just feel terrible when I don't work out.
Yeah, it's not the sexiest of topics, but I sort of fell off the wagon a little bit recently on my workouts. I was doing a high intensity interval training, body weight workout, and I'd fallen off the wagon for a few months during the middle of the year. And I noticed I started falling apart, and now I'm back in for about a week, and I'm just like, wow, it's spectacular. It's a really amazing difference, mentally, physically.
Yeah, whenever I stop, I just feel like hell, and
This is a taxing job. People don't realize that it's actually, I mean, I don't want to say athletic necessarily, but I mean, in terms of your back health and how you feel and how many hours you can sit in front of a screen. And
it's terrible. Yeah, I mean, if I stop, well, I do a lot of weights, and if I stop deadlifting, my back just goes. I mean, sitting for that many hours. I mean, I have a stand-up desk and everything, but that only does so much, I find. I mean,
I've even heard that the sit stands are sort of now people, after so many years of using them, they're starting to find they have other problems. Like if they only stand, then they get knee problems. And
well, that happened to me actually.
Really?
When I first got my desk, I was like standing all the time, thinking it was great. And then I had circulation problems in my legs. I couldn't figure out what was going on.
Wow, really? Oh, wow.
I couldn't connect, but then I figured it out. It was my stand-up desk. So once I sat down for a while, lo and behold,
this super healthy thing I'm doing is killing me.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think you'd ever try one of those hamster wheels where you're just like walking all the time?
While I'm composing?
They always say like that's the I think it was Brahms that was a big aficionado of going for walks and composing while he walked. So that's like the high-tech version of that. So when we were talking earlier, you were talking about how you're self-taught, you learned a lot by ear, and you sort of were kind of, in your teen, I think as many of us were in our teen years, kind of lost as to where you were going with it. And you weren't really aware of film music until you're about your sort of mid-20s. And then you were speaking about this really big defining moment where someone was playing a piece of music that really affected you. Can you tell that story?
I loved, movies just like everybody, and I loved music. I was really into music. I took piano when I was a kid. Actually, technically, it was organ. I played organ, and I don't think we could afford a piano at that time, and it was too loud for our apartment, so I had the headphones on and practiced on that, and then I switched to a two-tiered organ, and then once I got in my teens, that wasn't cool, and
Really?
Yeah, I was the butt of a lot of jokes, and I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. Once I hit about 12 years old, my dad played guitar by ear. He was into country music, and he was actually a pretty good picker. He had a chord book sitting around one time, and I picked it up and I was looking and I figured out I could do these chords, and then I could play along to my records. I was right into the heavy music by then. But it was an acoustic. It didn't have the sound that I wanted. A friend of mine had a little miniature copy of a Strat he lent me, and I was playing around with that, and I figured out how to put it into my tape deck. We had a stereo with a cassette deck, the microphone input.
Yeah.
So I figured out how to, I don't know if you ever did that, but you put it into the input, just crank the snot out, and you get a distorted guitar.
Exactly,
I was in heaven. So I learned some of that, and they were like, holy cow, did you do that? Sounds great. And, I was off to the races. But I never was really that confident in my abilities. I convinced my mom to sell our organ, and I bought we went down to Lonamaquaid. I bought a Gibson S1 and a Trainer amp, and I, started playing all my records. But I never took lessons. I think that was probably a mistake. But I learned by ear, and I got fairly good. But I was never really confident enough in my abilities to play in a band or anything. So I love music, but I didn't know what to do after high school. And my mom convinced me, to go to college for business administration, for accounting, and I thought, okay, nothing else to do, so I may as well do this.
Wow.
I hated it.
How long did you stay with the program?
3 years. Okay. It's a 3-year program. Yeah. I made it through. I just squeaked by, basically. Wow. I think I had more fun with my electives, like photography and all of that. I was more into that. Yeah. So anyway, after college, I was kind of, what am I going to do? I just didn't want to, get a job in accounting. I knew I was going to be miserable. So I ended up working in some music stores. I was out in Mississauga at this time. Uh-huh. So back to your point, I never knew about film music. I kind of knew, I guess, that it existed. I'd watch Jaws and, you joke about the theme but I never really thought about the music. And yeah, somebody I knew at the time, we went and saw The Mission. I wasn't even paying attention. I was just watching the movie. And afterwards, a friend of, the girl I was with came up and said, "Did you hear that music?" And I was like, "Music? What music?" And she actually got the cassette of the score. And so one day she's playing it in her apartment. I'm not really listening, but I just find myself being drawn into this music. And it was just something so beautiful that I'd never heard in, orchestral music, I guess. Mm-hmm. It just bowled me over. And within minutes, I had tears running down my face. And, my girlfriend's like, "What's the matter?" I was like, "This is damn music. I don't know." I surprised myself, and I didn't really know what to make of it. But it was just a real defining moment. I guess the seed got planted in the back of my head.
All right.
So anyway, at that time, I was working in a music store. I was making no money, and I realized I had to do something. So I decided to go to school for recording engineering at Trebas. Mm-hmm. Took the 2-year program. So I thought I'd get a job in a recording studio. So while I was there, one of my teachers, made it clear to us just how hard it would be getting a job in a recording studio, right. For one thing. The hours are going to be miserable. You're going to be working all night, and the pay is going to be ridiculously low if you're going to get paid at all. So I was just like, oh, really? What am I going to do? But he said, look, there's another avenue, and that's the film business, the technical side, post-production. So I kind of looked into it, and I thought, great, I got my resume together. I went and started knocking on doors, all the post-production facilities in town, and it was hard, I couldn't get a job for a while, and I kept going. Finally, one guy sat me down. He said, look, I'm not hiring, I'm not looking for anybody, but I know of a place in town that's expanding. It was Film House, and they're looking for people. So I raced down there and gave him my resume. I met one of the managers, and he said, okay, look it over. And they called me a couple of days later and, gave me a job. I was making $10 an hour, and, I was ecstatic. Finally, my first job in the field.
The Trebas stuff must have really set you up, though, because, I know in my experience, having a facility with the technical side of it or the mixing side, being able to produce your own material is really helpful, and being able to deliver broadcast-ready stuff. Absolutely. Has that been a big part of your career in terms of what people have looked to you to do?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think a lot of composers now, especially if you're working on, television and things, you don't have the budget often to go out and have somebody mixing your stuff. Some guys do, and that's great. But I find with that background, I can do it well enough, and people have complimented me on my mixes, so I think I'm, doing it
Yep.
well enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time saver, not and obviously less expensive, and you're
Right.
just doing it on the fly. And when you're under pressure for time, the last thing you want to be doing is sending your stuff out, getting it back, making tweaks.
Sure.
So it's a big time saver.
Are you, is your way of operating that you're kind of doing everything at the same time? You're writing and arranging and orchestrating and mixing as sort of like a one
Yep.
thing, or is it, you sort of break everything out?
No, I find it just saves time. I tend to balance things out as I go along, and I'm mixing right in the box. I used to have a console, and I'd do it afterwards, do all my tracks and everything. But it's just such a time saver for me to do everything in the box. And with the technology these days, I sort of compose in my DAW Cubase, and I apply a certain amount of effects and everything, and then I do mastering in Pro Tools. So I'll record my stems over to Pro Tools, and then I'll master them.
You told me a really great story about one of the instructors at Trebas. I don't know if it's the same one that gave you the advice of going into post-production, but there was one thing he said to the students. And then there was a great sort of like full circle moment with that instructor too, with an email later. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, one day he just, he came in and he said, "So, what's the one thing you're going to have to remember if you're going to be in this field, And I kind of thought about it, and I raised my, nobody else said anything, and I said, "Sacrifice." And he said, "Bingo!" But I knew, it was going to be a grind. And, he said, "Yeah, if you're going to be in this field, don't expect to be, working a 9-to-5 job, going home, having all your weekends.
Yeah.
This is a crazy field. You're going to have to be prepared to give up a lot of your free time." Yeah, later on, like you were saying, he sent me an email years later. I was really surprised. He said, "Geez, I saw your name on this film, and I remembered you from my class." And he said, "You're the only one in all of my classes that ended up working in the field."
Isn't that interesting?
I said, "What?"
Something I think of that's interesting, just as we're speaking about the idea of sacrifice and some of the things you're mentioning, like I really like this may be apocryphal. I think it's never trust what you read on the internet, but it's supposedly attributed to Oscar Wilde. I think I could be completely wrong about this. Anyways, It's something to the effect of work is more fun than fun. And sometimes I think I am working a 10-hour day or a 13-hour day or whatever. Sometimes even more depending on when the crunch is. But there is also an aspect to while I'm doing way more work or grinding away and always working, like what's a weekend, what's a holiday, you're always kind of waiting, oh yeah, right, it's like long week, like, and you're like, oh, that's interesting, I'm still working. But there's also an aspect to which you're just like so obsessed and so passionate about what you're doing that it doesn't feel in a way like a sacrifice.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, and it's been that way for me as well. I have to stop myself sometimes and just realize how fortunate we are, to be doing what you're doing. A couple hundred years ago, to be able to sit and just write music and get paid for it and, make a living out of it, that is, an extremely, rare thing, really, when you think about it in man's history. It's just, it's incredible. So
that's great. I love that full circle kind of moment when you got that email from that instructor. So back to Filmhouse. This was that's a 10-year grind. From Filmhouse and then later into I think you were working at Deluxe, right? Not doing anything. You weren't writing music. You were doing sort of ancillary stuff, but it seemed like it was a real like a film school almost for you, like learning the ropes.
Yeah, it was a great education working at, first like Filmhouse, and then, we moved over, it was called Deluxe, and so I started, I was a projectionist. They taught me how to use the projector, and, I was doing screenings, and, that was when, it was all manual. You had to hit the changeover marks, when you see them on the screen. It was a little bit of pressure. You got a room full of people.
Yeah.
And then I moved over to the Foley Theater, running the projector and the mag tape. And of course, this was all when it was all dubbers. You had a room, just loads of dubbers that you'd load your tracks onto when they did a mix. You'd have, I don't know how many reels going at the same time. So you'd be sitting in this room, these things would be going back and forth all day. But I'd realized at that point that I wanted to try film scoring. And somebody set me up with one of the color timers over at the lab. There was two parts of the business, the sound facility, and there was the lab. And so he was a color timer, but he was doing documentaries on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And he hooked me up with this guy, and really nice guy. His name was Vaughn, and he had this little 6-minute short that he needed music for. So I said, okay, let me try it. I didn't know what. And all I had was an acoustic guitar. I think I had this 1/4-inch reel-to-reel.
Oh, wow.
I didn't have anything. And so I just watched this thing on VHS, and I sat at home, and I plucked out melodies on my guitar.
Wow.
But I also knew a couple of guys who I'd known from a music store that I worked, and they had a little recording studio up in Brampton. They had it in this office space. So I phoned them up, and I asked them, if I could come in there at night or on the weekend and do my recording in there and mix. And so I got the melodies down, and I went up there, and, it all worked out pretty good. And I kind of had this confidence afterward that I could write a melody, and that it could kind of work to picture. So, the filmmaker was happy, and I actually went on to do, I think, at least 3 or 4 other documentaries with him, over the years. So that got my foot in the door, it kind of gave me the confidence. Okay, I think I can do this.
Mm.
And then I ended up scoring a student film, a guy that came through who ended up working at Deluxe in the machine room. He was in his graduate year at Ryerson. And I discovered he was, doing a film, and we got talking. He was, looking for somebody to do the music. I told him I'd love to do the music, and he said he was also looking for somewhere to mix it. He needed post. Well, I said I got at this Foley stage. I know how to run the thing, and engineers, they gave me the crash course on the console, and we did everything in one weekend. I scored the film, prior to that, and then we went in on a Friday night just after the mixers left, and we did the ADR, the Foley, the mix. We went from Friday night to Monday morning. I think we took one break. It was like a 3-hour cat nap.
Yeah.
And I was literally finishing the last when the mixer walked in the door.
Wow.
And I was like, give me 5 minutes. Anyway, I got this thing done. It was a great experience. And, these two guys that worked on were in their graduate year. They ended up becoming like my best friends. And
cool.
One of them was really good at pushing the film. We actually had Norman Jewison come in and watch it.
Wow.
And he also got the head of IMAX. I can't remember his name, but he came in and watched it, and I couldn't believe it. These guys were sitting there watching this little student film.
It's sort of brilliant in a way, because you're in this environment where you're learning about filmmaking, you're watching dailies, you're watching rushes, you're watching edits, roughs, temps, you're like seeing this whole development, and you're probably also privy to a lot of conversations between people in that room where they're making decisions about, this doesn't work, how are we going to fix this, or talking about the narrative elements that are being constructed.
Yeah, see, at that point I was up in the machine room, and then I got offered this job as a client rep. Somebody, left that position, and, I took that on. I thought it'd be a good chance to meet a lot of people, basically, which it ended up being. So I was basically this glorified usher. I was in charge of the screening theater where they ran all the dailies. So I, did the scheduling, and I had to be there, usher the man, make sure the projectionist is there, and if he wasn't, I had to do it. And so that was an amazing experience, because I got to meet so many people that were, fairly intimidating people. I mean, they were big actors, big directors, all the DOPs that we had to deal with, to make sure they were happy.
I mean, these are A-listers. You said you saw Tarantino, Zimmer was in there, like...
I met Quentin Tarantino one time, and just a slew of stars. I mean, Shirley MacLaine I had to deal with one time. She was really nice, very businesslike, but she would come and watch her dailies without the crew. She'd come in separately.
Right.
So she'd ask for me, and we'd come in the theater, and I'd sit with her, and I'd watch the daily. She was on this, romantic comedy. Marcello Mastroianni was in it. It was a good experience of dealing with, people that were kind of intimidating a little bit, I think, for most people.
Yeah.
And the directors, they weren't always nice. There were some real, incidences that I had to deal with. When you got a screening theater and then somebody's going over time, maybe, and then you got a crew walking in and the producer's going, what the hell?
Right.
You got to walk in and kick people out of the theater. I remember picking John Boorman up off the floor one time. He flipped over in his chair. In the back, I had to run. There were some funny stories.
These are all critical aspects of actually working the job that we do on a daily basis. Client services really is that's probably one of the top things that you have to get right.
Yeah. You had to know how to get along with people in heated situations, and at that stage I was kind of meeting more people and getting my foot in the door for composing.
You're meeting a lot of editors and getting a chance to show your music to them as well.
Yep. Yeah, I would find ways to sneak my stuff in. If I knew they were looking for music, I'd say, "Listen,
brilliant.
I did this little cue. Can we just play it for you?" And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
And you ended up landing your first agent because you knew people from Shaftesbury through Deluxe, and that sort of connected the dots at that point.
I knew one woman from Shaftesbury, Laura Harbin, a producer there, and I ran into her at a barbecue at the Canadian Film Center, and I asked her, "Listen, how do I get in, doing music for you guys?" And she recommended I contact Arpex Media, Ron Prue, and I sent him a tape, and he liked what he heard. He said, "There's something here. I think we could make a go of it." So it was a great experience with Ron. Over the years, I learned so much from him, and. So met, there you go. Just somebody I'd known through working, was able to get me on my path,
Yeah, there's that idea of warm introductions, which comes up so often. This idea of connecting the dots, not just coming at something cold. I think a lot of people out of school or who are just starting out think that it's just about brute force. You got to. Kick the door down or get your resume or your CD or your business card to the right person. And oftentimes it's just these friendly relationships and someone going, "You know what? Let me talk to so-and-so and recommend you, or let me get you on the phone with someone."
Absolutely. I think that's the way it worked for me in 90% of my jobs. I don't know if I ever got a job from just firing off a demo to somebody cold. It's a rare thing. You really have to have the ear, of somebody close to the producers, the directors, or, that's going to recommend you. That's, I think, a real key. Find out how you can get around those people, first of all. Music editors, film editors, mixers, I've gotten jobs from recommendations from mixers.
Right. And in fact, you're, one of the biggest projects you've had the chance to work on, Saving Hope, was also sort of gotten actually, in fact, by someone that you had hired before, who then turned around and was able to give you an introduction for that show.
Yeah. That was, I got that as a reference by the music editor who was working on Saving Hope, Kevin Banks. And it was years before that. Probably 10 years or 15 years earlier, I was working on one of my first features, and we were mixing at Deluxe. And, there was an issue with one of the tracks, and I needed to do a quick edit, and he was, around, and I think he was working on the project, so he helped me out, and he said, "Look, if you ever need help, music editing, and, here's my card," kind of thing, and I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought, why would I need a music editor? I could. But later on, I was working on, I think it was Life with Derek, the series, and I really started to need help with, getting my tracks together, the delivery, Pro Tools. So I gave him a shot, and we managed to work something out, and I would just send him my quick stems, and he would put all the Pro Tools sessions together for me, make sure everything was. He would catch mistakes that I'd make,
that's so helpful,
really great backup to have. Yeah. So he worked on quite a number of projects with me in that capacity, and it was great. And then later on, Saving Hope, he called me and actually said, "Hey, do you mind if I put you up for this series?" I was like, "You
Do
kidding?"
you mind? Yeah, please don't.
Nah. So
Good.
yeah, I got a meeting with the the showrunner and one of the producers, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Saving Hope was a bit of a dream job, as it turned out. It was hard at the beginning. Of course, you gotta make it work, and you gotta make your cues work, and a lot of changes. But once it got rolling, normally you post your cues for everybody to watch. You get your notes back, and you expect corrections. But on this one, I'd be posting my notes. I think by the I don't know, 5th or 6th episode, they would stop watching them, and I'd be like, "Well, what's going on? Anybody, can get back to me?" And we'd just end up going to the mix, and everything would be fine. And
Wow.
Eventually, I just said, "Look, do you want me to just keep posting this stuff? Is anybody gonna?" Nah, don't worry about it.
Wow.
So I was like, "Okay, great." And also Kevin, was great. He's a really good music editor, great ear. And so he was taking on a certain amount of cues as well.
Sure, right.
Once the schedule started getting a little tighter, so he would, if there was 30 cues, he'd probably take 10 cues from me, So we really, got the system going, and it was just a great, ended up going for 85 episodes.
This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online @ScreenComposers. And now, back to our show. What's your communication style, or what's your method? Like, I'm wondering, like, in terms of how you manage to get to a point where you're not getting notes anymore, and they're not even bothering you with sending off like these cues. Is it a combination of how you communicated about what you were doing and they found that trust in you, or is it just because you have an instinct for the show and they found that you were just in this groove and they knew that it was just going to continue?
Well, you know what? I think a big part of it would be that when we still had spotting sessions, of course. Every week we'd go in, and David Wellington, who was pretty much the showrunner, they would temp the existing, whatever we were working on, the episode, they would temp it with my music, and he would say, "Yeah, that cue I'm not crazy about, let's drop that one. Okay, get rid of that sound. Like that, this works." And I had a sense of what he liked. I remember when we first met, I asked him, I said, "Look, if you could score this film, if you could have anybody from Hollywood on this show, who would you pick?" And he said, "Harry Gregson Williams."
Wow.
I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, that gives me an idea of, kind of where, big, someone big and very difficult to emulate, of course."
And you were like, "You were supposed to say me."
Yeah, that's right. But I really wanted a sense, and that was it. It was the spotting sessions that, we kind of hatched that out.
Yeah, I really believe that spotting sessions are one of the most important parts of the whole process. If you can get that right, it tends to be more or less smooth sailing for everything else. You were mentioning when you were doing that first documentary and plunking out things on the guitar and the reel-to-reel that, you had a sense of melody. And that's when I asked you sort of what your style is, or what sort of makes you. You're like, "I think I can write a pretty great melody." How are you finding that these days? Because I think that there's sort of, what I would call an allergy to melody in most, scoring these days. How are you managing, that aspect of it, given that you think one of your main weapons of choice is the fact that you write melody?
Well, you can't always go that route. That's just you have to be able to do other styles as well. And sometimes that's just, pads and writing out very simple, non-melodic, passages that really don't, grab the listener's attention, I think, as much as a melody does. And, on Saving Hope, I was really lucky in that I was able to do a lot of melodic stuff, and it worked. It seemed to work. I came up with some themes that, that it worked for the two main characters in certain situations. And I was, in a lot of different melodies that worked in different scenarios. So
Do you feel that it's about choosing the moments? Because I mean, there are times when, and I think we're sort of seeing that. Maybe there's a bit of a renaissance now because you see things that are like in sort of, boutique high-end television, like let's say, for instance, something like Queen's Gambit. There are moments where there is no dialogue, and there are big long shots when they're, either establishing thoughts or they're moving through something, or there's a, some sort of, landscapey type thing happening, whether it's an actual landscape or not. Maybe that's just about picking those moments and saying, that's where the melody's going to go. And when there is lots of other stuff happening, everything sort of takes a backseat to that.
Again, when you say melody, I mean, melody is so open for interpretation. I mean, what it is. It could be just a simple motif, or it could be a big soaring thing. So that's, kind of where your instincts have to come in. I mean, what does this call for? Can you? I mean, I love, this. It's great when you have a chance to spread your wings and do some big sweeping thing.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful. I've been in that situation, where I've gone overboard. And then I look back and I go, oh, my God, what was I thinking? I mean, that was just way too much. So you learn from that, hopefully. In the back of my head, I always believe that if you can create something that is like a signature, melody or motif, I think it really helps an audience connect. TV series in particular, I find, because they keep coming back to that thing that grabs them. Yeah. If it works, it works. And it's it reminds them that, we're in this show, or you use as an act in, as a signifier. Okay, we're back in the show. Or if it's something emotional, I think it helps the audience instead of something different all the time. Connect with the show. Connect with the emotional element of the show.
I remember when I was first starting out, again, there's always this disconnect when you're doing something versus when you're observing something. You sort of don't put one and one together sometimes. And I when I started scoring, student films and things, I always thought, well, every cue has to be different. We can't be repeating ourselves. That would be like self-plagiarism, or it would be just lazy to use the same theme here or to even use the same cue. And now I have understood, no, those are very powerful devices. If you use them well, you want that balance between the audience being familiar enough, but also being surprised here and there, so that it doesn't become,
too repetitive. For
exactly.
Sure. Yeah, and I made that mistake early in my career. I mean, that student film I was telling you about, the Ryerson. I must have put 100 melodies in there, and I remember screening it for. And if you remember George Blondheim, he was a fairly successful Canadian. I think he was Canadian-based composer. Unfortunately, he passed away this last year, I think. But I remember we got him in. He was around the facility, and I had managed to sneak him in and get his opinion. I want your opinion on the score. And he said, look, you've got so much stuff in this show. You've got to pair, just strip away and use your main, just pick 2 or 3 themes and, use those. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's
a tricky thing. You can really go deep with this stuff. I mean, I think it's always, you have to remember too, that the music is only one, like the music has many layers, but it is also a layer within another thing, which is the film or the series, which has characters and it has themes and it has, the production design has its own sort of thing. The costuming might be its own thing, all these different layers. And then of course, dialogue and meaning. And you're only one part of that.
When you're starting out, you want to be noticed.
You got it,
just get everything in there you can, and then you realize, that's okay. Hold on, and then it all becomes taste.
Right.
Really, it's about taste and what the best films are the ones that draw you in. I mean, obviously they have to be a half decent film, but if the music is working really well with them. You don't notice that music in most cases, I would say.
Yeah.
I think it's okay sometimes to have the music kind of take over, and it's okay if the audience notices the music at that point, I think, and enjoys it. But if it's detracting from the story and if it's taking you away.
Yeah, if you're losing focus on the thing you're supposed to be focusing on, then you're failing pretty badly.
Which is funny because it takes me back to The Mission, when I hear that, because if you remember, Jerry Goldsmith had an interview one time. I think somebody asked him, what do you think about the score for The Mish? And he says, the worst score I've ever heard. And they were like, what? And he said, it's the worst score because it was so good it detracted from the film. It was just ridiculous,
Right.
I mean, you were always hearing this music. I thought that was really interesting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Yeah, no kidding. It's the worst score ever. Well, I mean, I guess it all depends on your perspective. Like, what is the benchmark you're using? Well, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I think I've often noticed this with, especially in independent films. You sometimes look at something and goes, I don't know, I couldn't tell you what it is, but there's something kind of like screwed up about this. Like it doesn't sit right, or it just feels a little off, or something must have gone wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. You can't say maybe it's the acting, maybe it's the dialogue, maybe it was the writing, maybe it's the story. You don't know. And I always find like when you then approach the music to that, you kind of have to have the music be messed up in a similar way. It can't be perfect. It has to have that kind of wabi-sabi kind of effect where it's slightly screwed up in a similar way so it fits that strange puzzle piece.
That's an interesting approach, yeah. I mean, how can you have this beautiful, well done score if the scene is just a little off kilter and it's a strange film. You have to make it bizarre in a way.
Yeah, I guess in the same way that if you have an intimate scene, you have to have an intimate score. You can't have this big, lush thing, which is for this small story. Yeah. You're going into season 3, or you're in season 3 right now for Hudson Rex.
Yeah.
And that's been a pretty big hit as well. And you co-score that with Phil Bennett, is that right?
Yeah. It's been a really good experience. I love working with Phil. We've got a great rapport. I've worked on a couple other shows with him. And, of course, when you got two composers on a show, you want to get to that point where you can't really tell styles from each other. So, and we do have our own styles, but I think it's only something that seasoned listener would be able to tell.
What's the show about, and what was the approach to the score?
It is it's a show about a police officer shot in Newfoundland. So it's a detective and his dog, a German Shepherd. He's a highly trained dog that, is able to sniff out, everything. He basically solves crimes for this guy for the whole series. I think this guy would be lost without this dog.
Right.
It's based on a series out of Germany called Kommissar Rex.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was this series that went years and years ago, but it was really successful in Germany. It went for like 18 seasons.
Holy smokes.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And Shaftesbury, found out about this show, and they decided to do a Canadian version. And so there was a lot of people involved. The German producers were involved, and Shaftesbury, and then Rogers, who were producing as well, were involved. And so when it started, they were having some trouble with the music, and I guess they had to make a change. And then they contacted me. My agent reached out, and I talked to Ron about it, and it was a quick decision, had to be made. They were already in the 10th or 11th hour.
Oh, wow.
Because, they tried all this stuff. They had issues, and so they needed to roll fast. So I jumped on, and it was pretty hairy for the first season. The first few episodes, really fun, defining what it was that they needed. We went through a lot of different stuff, and of course, we had a lot of comments coming in from everybody, so it was a bit of a battle. So we, slowly got our stuff together and found an avenue that worked. They wanted something modern. And then, as we've been going along, we've been sort of trying out new things. And, in the second season, we started injecting more guitar. I mean, guitar, I play guitar, and I know you're a guitarist, and, it's such the technology now.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so much fun coming up with new sounds on guitar now.
What are you using?
I just, I had the XFX2, and I just upgraded, about 6 months ago to the XFX3. Mm-hmm. I use that mainly now. It's just so amazing once you really dive deep into it, the things you could do. And, it really becomes an instrument that isn't guitar sounding. I mean, you could tell it's a guitar, but it's not, sitting down and like playing a twangy guitar. It's such a cool sound that with a modern style.
Yeah.
Now,
Have you heard of the Sertano Bender?
No, I haven't.
I just heard about this. This is like, and it's been on my mind pretty heavy. Sertano Bender is this guy. I think his name is John Sertano, and he makes these big metal apparatus that you screw onto the tail of your guitar. And then you thread, I think it's the G and the B string through it. And it allows you to do bends like lap steel. Sorry, I was going to say like pedal steel, not lap steel. And it just sounds incredible. But I saw someone using it on a lap steel in order to get that pedal steel bends and things. And I'm like, whoa, that is pretty cool. So
it stretches, it takes the strings and you can really stretch the heck out of them.
Yeah, it basically, you almost can't tell the difference when you put it onto a lap steel anyways, between that and a pedal steel. It does. I mean, pedal steel is like this incredibly complex instrument that has so many different actions. But so this one, you really just have the G and the B to play with. But there's so many variations you can come up with. But to my mind, as a guitar player, when I'm thinking about like building out pads or building out like large, big swells or anything that sounds very cinematic without getting too honky tonky or country and western, I think that'd be a really cool approach.
Well, that's really sounds interesting. I'll check that out. Sertano Bender.
Sertano Benders, yeah. How are you and Phil then? How did you work out like to sort of make the sound come together? Was that a conscious thing, or were you sharing templates and plugins, or how did that work?
I think it's partly a conscious thing. We talked about the sounds. Where are we getting them? What's our palette? Where are we drawing our sounds from? Is it Omnisphere? Is it different libraries? We just talk about what's working well. When you're working with somebody else, there's always that element of it's just a natural element of competition. I think you're trying to be good, so you're listening to each other's cues, of course, and you're that's cool. So let's try something similar to that, and of course, you're asking each other, "What's that? What? Come on, what are you using there?
Nice.
And you share. It's a very collaborative effort.
No secrets anymore.
No secrets. Yeah, but he's a talented guy. I mean, and he's a really great guitarist. So it's it's a joy to work with somebody when you're kind of on the same playing field.
But you guys are actually completely on opposite sides of the country, practically, right?
Yep.
Does that ever pose a problem?
Not at all. Not at all. It's just, the time difference. You got to be aware of that when you're booking meetings or, spotting sessions. We just do our spotting sessions on the phone on conference calls. And we use a program, we're all watching the same picture and we just comment. It goes pretty smooth now.
We're talking pre-COVID times as well. You're still not in the room with the producers to do the spotting session. You're doing it all remotely. I
haven't had a spotting session in my studio. I can't remember the last spotting session, really, where producers have come to my studio and sat down and do a spotting session. I think it was, on a Christmas movie I had in Toronto like 10 years ago.
Wow.
I just find nobody wants to meet anymore.
Do you think that's a drawback? Because I know a lot of people really miss the press in the flesh and having people in like being able to read body language when someone's watching something or listening to something. Do you find that this has been a hindrance, or does it not made much of a difference?
When you're starting a show, I think it can be a little tricky talking to people on a phone.
Yeah.
If you're in the same room, it helps. I should say, Saving Hope, we were spotting in person. That was the show. So it wasn't that long ago, but that wasn't in my studio. That was at their facility. We just show up in the editing facility. So I think it is better in a way to meet in person. But after you're rolling, and you've got so much under your belt, I think it doesn't make a big difference. I think.
So we were talking a little bit about this idea of how ideas are developed and those magic moments. They're so ephemeral. They sometimes come up, when the muse comes and visits you, you can't really determine it. Do you have a way of creating or establishing a kind of, is there a ritual you use or some sort of method or a sequence of things that you do to sort of try and help those moments happen more often?
It's so hard to predict how they happen. One's coming to mind. I worked on this film. It's called Spirit Bear. There was a scene where the main character, this young teenager, is going through the woods and he comes across this bear and the bear comes up to him. And I had to do it pretty quick. I had a weekend to do this scene to present it to the, I was struggling, and I knew I had to find a theme, something, really noble. And you know how I came up with it? I had the kettle on in my kitchen. And I turned it on, and it was one of these, it wasn't electric, it was sitting on the stovetop, right? So I was sitting in my living room waiting for this thing to boil, and it made a sound as it was steaming.
Wow.
And something in the sound, it was melodic to me. Like there was some kind of notes, and I just, and it worked out. And I immediately went down to my studio, and I developed the theme from these bloody notes. I mean, so how do you.
Well, I hope you credited the kettle on the cue sheet.
The Kettle Company, yes.
Co-composed by Kettle.
Yeah, that was a pretty crazy thing. But, so to answer your question, I mean, it just happens from the most, obscure. Sometimes, it's only from sitting and plunking away at your piano or whatever instrument you're using. And sometimes it's the hardest, when you work the hardest, you just keep working at it, and something happens. And then it's just there. And sometimes it's easy. Sometimes things just happen out of the blue. But more often not, for me, it's you got to work at it.
One thing I found it's almost worked, and this is something I can't do right now, which is a little bit upsetting, is if I'm stuck on something, I'll go and hang out at a cafe or go to a pub or something and just hang out and listen to whatever they have piping over the speakers. And it can, I don't know why this works, but it works every single time. There'll be something, it can be the worst wrong thing. You can be like, oh, you know what? It's not that, but it's whatever the opposite of that is, or maybe it's like, oh, that bass line, that's the whole trick. Or, oh, it's got to sound big and deep like this sample that they're using in this thing or something. I don't know why, but it's never failed me.
That's interesting. That happens to me a lot when I'm actually not listening to the music so much. Like if I'll be in my car and it'd just be a radio, it could be a classical piece playing. You're kind of listening and you hear something that's related to that music, but it's not that music. You hear another melody comes into your head.
Yeah, right.
But it's very similar, but it's not. It's not the music, but you come up with this thing that's very close almost in a sense. That's a strange thing when that happens.
I had that happen once. I was sitting on a bus and someone was listening to Britney Spears. I later found out on their headphones, so loud that I could hear it from across the bus. But where I thought the one was like the three. So I heard the song beginning on the third beat, and it was just this weird progression, and everything was just. I'm like, what is this weird pop music that sounds like it's written in 2066? Like it just sounded so bizarre. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I was trying to figure out what the melodic thing is. The other thing I find is kind of strange is you try to create those situations so that you mishear things purposely. And one of the ways I found by accident was, if you have like a fan that's running to cool you down, if you run sound through it, it goes, and has this phasing effect. And sometimes you can purposely use that and mishear things through the fan. And it'll create that overtone series where you hear things and melodies that aren't there.
Yeah, there's different ways. Oftentimes it's just when you're doing something so unrelated to music. The
important thing is you look like you're crazy while you're doing it. So everyone goes, oh, you must be an artist.
He's very eccentric. He's the real deal, yeah.
So when you say, you have to work really hard sometimes to get that idea to come out, how do you know, or how do you tell the difference between I need to push through on this, it will come, or I need to abandon this is as good as it's going to get, I am overthinking it?
Oh, well, that's a very hard one. I think often deadlines will dictate that for you.
You never finish, you just stop.
Yeah, you drop dead or whatever, I don't know, but that's a good one. I think it's just intuition again. You just, okay, this is good enough. If I beat this anymore, it's just going to... Sometimes if you work at it too hard, you can end up losing what you had in the first place if you don't get it down.
Absolutely.
And then you go, oh my God, what was that again? That's a nightmare when that happens. You have something in your head.
You fail to save version 1 and you realize after version 18 that version 1 was the thing.
It was the thing. Yeah, you have to make those mistakes, in your career. Well, I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God, and I believe, we get handed these things, I think, when we really search for them. and we're ready. When we're ready, remember Chris Dedrick, the great Chris Dedrick. He was at a conference one time on a panel. This is years and years ago, and I'll never forget. Something he said. He believed that we get projects when we're ready for them. And that stuck with me for a long time, and it really made sense. Once you get to a certain point, it's funny, some things come along only when you have gone through those trials. And that kind of thing just makes me even believe more that there's, higher powers at work here. And, when we really search for things and we really try, I think we get handed what we need.
What's your thought on people coming up in the business now? Do you have any advice for composers starting out?
With technology, and people not meeting as much, I don't know. It's a funny thing. Like when I started out, you kind of had to be face to face with people. You had to get out and get a meeting with them.
Sure.
That doesn't always happen now.
I just think about the example of you were working at, film, the
Deluxe,
ended up being Deluxe, and not only what an education that was, but that you were just like face to face with these people who got a sense of who you were, what you were into, what you were like, because that's the real thing. We want to work with people who are cool. Like the hang is so much of what creates those relationships that are sticky, where someone goes, you know what? Let's hear some of your music because, you're great and I would love to work with you. So that barrier sort of for them to trust you enough to do something is already, surpassed quite a bit.
Well, that's the downside of all the technology now, right?
Yeah.
You're not getting that face-to-face contact and developing relationships, and not even talking about film music, just being people, joking around.
Yeah.
And that's a big one. I miss that. I do miss that.
And now with COVID, there's nothing to talk about. You call someone a month and you're like, how are things? Man, it's the same as it was a month ago.
Sucks, man. So don't ask me.
Like no trips, no going anywhere. Like went to the grocery store. That was scary. Terrifying.
Yeah. It's, and this is why I was kind of looking forward to this because, of course, being a composer can be isolating. It's a tough job that way sometimes. I really miss sometimes the camaraderie that I had, in the jobs and, the spotting sessions and being one-on-one with somebody. It's just a great thing.
Do you ever think, there's been returns to things that are sort of like, well, for instance, like the interest in analog gear or the interest in analog modular synthesizer or LPs and using vinyl or playing records as opposed to playing CDs. Do you think we'll ever go back to people wanting to exist and work in these sort of co-op style spaces where you have like a studio here and then like a manufacturer, and then maybe a guy who makes like art, like visual art, and this whole like, I don't know if you know 401 Richmond in Toronto, but it was sort of this hub of all these different artists working together. Yeah. And I've always been kind of jealous of that idea. Now it sort of seems unfeasible in some ways because it's so expensive rent-wise and everything else. But the advantage of the inspiration, the camaraderie, the ability to sort of make connections and network with one another, it seems to have a lot of upsides.
Oh, for sure it does, yeah. And, I guess that will depend on how this all plays out, really.
Right.
Is this going to be the last of the diseases that we see, or is this going to be a constant battle that we're facing? Right. Are people going to be comfortable, even when this blows over, are people going to be comfortable being around big groups of people like they used to be? Or is it going to be this constant fear? It's a different world. It's a different world. Those were great days, and I remember that's what I felt like working at Deluxe. I almost had I was thinking about renting a space there one time and just having my setup there because everybody's around. But like you say, the cost is high.
Yeah, the one thing it's for sure is we won't go back to the normal that was before. So what's next for you? What are you excited about? What are you working on?
Nothing. Other than Hudson and Rex right now.
That's taking up all your time.
Yeah, pretty much. Between seasons we get little breaks, which, I look forward to. After, 16 episodes, you kind of really need a breather. But at the same time, it would be great to take on something different.
When you're on a break, do you do anything musical, or is it just like you walk away and that's it?
For a little while, I just need to get a bit of space, walk
Right.
away. I mean, and that's, again, the challenge, what are you going to do now? Yeah, it's nice to step away a little bit, but at the same time, it's a great opportunity. I try to practice, guitar and piano a lot more. Mm-hmm. When I'm working, I just find it so difficult to... Last thing you want to do is sit in your studio after you've been there. You just want to get away. It's so difficult to keep your chops up. I'm constantly trying to make my process more streamlined, more, faster. I know the stuff better.
Right. And you got to fill the tank. I mean, you can't be working all the time or be trying to be creative. You need to do something that is just like emptying out your brain for a bit and filling it with some new materials. So I know you're not a social media guy, but you do have a very attractive website. Where can people find you online?
Koftinoff.com.
Koftinoff.com. Does that roll off the tongue or what? That's amazing.
I don't know. I hope so. Yeah, I hope people remember it.
That's great. Well, Gary, this is a lot of fun. Thanks so much for taking the time. It was great to hear the stories and see how you managed to connect the dots over time. And wish you all the best of luck with your projects ongoing and future. And
thanks so much, Adrian. It was a pleasure to talk to you. It was really good.
Brilliant.
All the best.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.